Future Sense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nick Jeans and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, Future Sense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is Future Sense. 10:11 on Future Sense here with Nick Jeans and Steve McDonald through till 11 o'clock. Thanks for your range of texts after we called for if there's anyone out there. We got a whole bunch of texts saying, hey guys, wherever listening, we're always here. And someone has also written, and thanks to Sandy, yes, we're here pondering my life after spilling around up and down my back. What? Ooh, not sure if that's right. My son was born with many problems, but as a young mum, I had to choose keeping my son alive or fighting Monsanto. Interesting. I chose my son for his 6.5 years of life. Your story reminds me how it changed our extended family's life. So shocked by your last statistics. The beautiful Byron community helped me keep him alive past all expectations. Love your show. Thanks so much. Not sure exactly what you're saying. There was clearly a big tough time there where you're battling with Monsanto or how that worked. But anyway, thanks for sharing. Really good. Yeah. Oh.
So.
Intuition.
You know
telepathy.
What I'm going to say, don't you?
I do. I know you're going to start talking about ESP and the like.
Yes. It's
amazing
quite
how I figured
topical
that out.
at the moment. And so let's talk about the process of human development, human evolution from a species perspective, and how our sensory awareness expands as we grow through these layers of consciousness. And I'll just lead us into that by talking from layer 4, which is going back to the sort of agricultural era way of being. If you think back to the Middle Ages when the world was ruled by kings and queens and their empires, and there were crusades against the opposition and all that kind of stuff. And with that, the emergence of that consciousness, and I guess that probably happened thousands and thousands of years ago when we came out of a sort of egocentric martial phase where the world was a very wild place and very violent and somewhat less organized than during the layer 4 period, where things became structured. So layer 4, that agricultural authoritarian era, was a feminine, communally oriented era where we were looking to build community, whereas the previous martial third was very individual, wild, exploratory, let's conquer territory in a wild way, kind of an experience. And in layer 4 we had, and I must say also that these layers have a correspondence with the chakras, and so with the emergence of the 4th layer we had a level of heart opening which allowed us to connect heart to heart with a second person in the presence of the other. So me being the first person, you being the second person, and in your presence, then at that particular level of development, at level of or layer of consciousness, we had developed the capacity to open our hearts to each other when we're in each other's presence, but just you and me, first and second person. And then with the emergence of the scientific industrial era and the associated consciousness, a capacity for a third person awareness developed. So you and I could connect deeply, and together we could sense the needs of a third person and develop a marketing plan to sell them something, you see, because we could figure out exactly how they were feeling, what they really needed, or what we could make them think they needed.
It's really important, this stuff, folks. This is a really important little figure in this search and research that we do.
It is.
I'm saying,
and so
take note.
And I'm drawing here not only on the work of Claire Grace, but also on Ken Wilber's writings.
Yes.
He's particularly written about this first, second, third, fourth person, etc. awareness that develops as we go through these layers. So in the modern scientific industrial, we had that awareness of the third person, the other, who wasn't in our presence. And then with the emergence of layer 6, which at a global scale is really just firing up now and beginning to I guess, disturb the comfort of the modern scientific.
Yes, you wouldn't say that it's taking power, because in some ways it would not like to feel that they're taking power. But they're disrupting the current power structures.
Absolutely, and it's it's a natural evolutionary process because the world has become so complex that the problems which are arising are too complex for the scientific industrial mind to resolve. Hence, some of the problems with our science, our traditional science. So, layer 6, we're expanding further. We're expanding our sensory capacity, our capacity to tap into the experience of another person beyond the third person to what Emma Wilber calls a fourth person awareness. And I must admit, it starts to do my head in a little bit when we sort of get here and go beyond it. But in simple terms, what we mean by that is you and I, being first and second person in each other's presence, could sense what a third person who may not be here might be sensing about another person or group of people. Okay, so you can see the sort of radius of our sensory awareness is expanding, and how that's playing out practically is that when people are transitioning into and going through this 6th layer of consciousness, they'll sometimes feel like they have the sorrows of the entire world on their shoulders. This is a very commonly reported experience.
I used to call it universal sadness in my earlier time, deeper in that layer, I think. But yes, really such a strong feeling that can be, and I know lots of people identify with exactly that.
Yes,
deep sadness.
And I must say that I went through it myself at one point where I found myself feeling really strong emotions, to the point of tearing up. But there was nothing going on in my immediate life which I could connect
just
that
sensing
to.
something telepathically in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, some capacity of awareness of other people and what they were going through emerged. And so that's just one indicator of the sensory awareness that might be emerging with this layer 6. And I don't think anybody has done a really good job of mapping it accurately yet. I mean, if somebody's aware of a good map that someone's come up with, please let us know. So we're, at least in the circles that we move in, we're still at the point of just sharing with each other about, I felt this and I sensed that, and starting to piece together, a viable story around that.
And of course, particularly in this region, but all around the world, the whole movement towards sitting in circle of one type or other, doing personal psychological work within a group, within a sort of new tribe, in inverted commas, so to speak, and that whole resonance there. Is really how we are, I think, practicing exactly that we can sit in a circle of 5, 10, 20, 50 people, not necessarily in a circle, but actually to feel each other's with some sort of degree of empathy. It's like we're practicing deeper empathy, I think, and being able to express ourselves and our feelings, as you're saying. And it's a bit of a talk fest, but it is a sort of place that we have to go to open up to some degree.
Not always a talk fest though. I mean, there are practices that have been around, and they do align with the emergence of this 6th layer, and times when it's bubbled up, like the 60s and 70s and things, where people will go and sit in the presence of a spiritual leader, and there will be nothing spoken, and there will be a widely reported sense of some kind of direct transmission happening.
A fly landing on your third eye, for example, sitting in satsang.
That's right. Morning, Russell.
Hello, Russell.
If you're listening. A friend of ours, Russell, wrote a very funny poem about a true experience he had.
Yeah, in an ashram in India years and years and years ago with a guru, and the fly flew from the guru's third eye directly to Russell's. Zoom! That's not to be discounted, that's for sure.
And he was transformed.
Yes. Those synchronicities, those moments, and you all know them. They're kind of some of the key, and we'll obviously come to a bit more of that shortly.
And he felt a buzz, I'm sure. So we're
not to be a fly on the wall on that one.
What we're starting to map here is further development of the emotional body, the subtle energy layer around the body, and this capacity, as it's often described, to stand in someone else's shoes. And I heard someone told me that the North American Indian version of that was called the wisdom of the moccasins.
Wisdom of the moccasins.
I'm not sure if that's true, but somebody out there might know.
It's a nice phrase, and it's very poetic.
It sounds good.
Slip into someone else's moccasins.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're listening this morning, it'd be really interesting if you'd like to text in your experience. What is your experience of some apparent extrasensory perception that is happening for you?
Yeah, exactly. So again, 0437341119. And it's interesting, we're talking about this today because we didn't know we were talking about this until sometime later yesterday, sometime yesterday, I can't remember when it was. And I was out last night for a little while, and I was talking to someone who had unusually for her, a whole raft of dream experiences, of precognitive, premonitionary, if that's a word, a premonition dream, a number of them in a row, which was unusual. And what does that mean? And I sort of was talking to her a little bit about evolution, as we're talking about here, that may be an indicator of an opening of an evolution in you and in us, and to take really good note of that, and to not discount it, and not to go by the conventional wisdom that these things are whatever they are, that they don't exist, but to really actually treat it as a sort of jewel that's arrived in your consciousness, so to speak, somehow.
Yeah, exactly. And with the emergence of this kind of awareness, it's something that's been around for a long time, and to really diagnose it or understand it from a developmental psychology point of view, we've got to expand the basic model that we describe a little bit to include what Ken Wilber calls lines of development. So it's usually we generalize on this show when we talk about somebody operating through one of the layers of consciousness. That's a generalization, and we do that just for simplicity's sake. But once you start to talk in more detail, you need to drill down a little bit and just understand that there are different lines or strands to our personality. So the nature of our being has different lines and strands to it, and you could see those, for example, as different intelligences. Like, for example, an interpersonal intelligence or an intrapersonal intelligence. And those lines can develop at different rates. So somebody can be developed up to and including, for example, layer 5 when it comes to their logical rational intelligence, which is often called IQ, but their emotional intelligence line of development might be at a different place. And the classic scenario that often has come up, I think I just lost my microphone for a minute, but it's back. The classic scenario that often has come up in the corporate world is this super intelligent CEO, who his IQ is off the scale, and yet he treats everybody very, very poorly. Yeah. And so his interpersonal intelligence, you might call it his emotional intelligence, is not developed as highly.
Which has been considered for a long time as an asset, often, that capacity to be that intellectually rigorous and direct and decision-making, and yet to treat people lesser than, to not actually acknowledge people's feelings, seems to have been a mode for a while. I think that's certainly changed a fair bit.
Yeah, it's also been a great paradox for many people who sort of say, hey, I just don't understand this. This guy is so smart, and yet he doesn't see that he's actually not treating people very well. And the one of the concepts for understanding that is this one that I'm explaining, of different lines of intelligence. So different aspects of your personality might develop faster than others. You might have particular talents in some particular area, and the extreme case of that is the savant, for example, who is just off the scale in one particular area, whether it be music or art or something like that, and then perhaps below the average in other areas of their personality. Extrasensory perception has been on the radar of governments for a while, and there was, of course, famously a remote viewing program run by both the Russian and the United States governments. I'm not too sure exactly when that started, but
Czechoslovakia in particular, in the former Soviet Union, was the place where that was centered, I think, from because I looked at this years and years ago. I think it was probably even pretty well post-war. But certainly by the 70s, I think those sort of programs were well in place. Yeah. And I think the Americans sort of followed suit, seeing what the Soviet Union was doing.
That's right. I think the Soviet Union got onto it first, and the Americans were playing catch-up. And I had the pleasure of meeting Harold Puthoff in Texas a few years back, and he was heading up the CIA's remote viewing program back in the day. And what a lovely man he was. He had shiny eyes and was clearly an enlightened soul. And I visited his laboratory in Austin, Texas, where he was at the time researching alternative ways of propelling things through space, using gravitational fields and all that kind of different stuff. And he had amazing paintings on his wall from people like Ingo Swann, who was one of the famous remote viewers in that program, and little things about the Emerald Tablet and all sorts of mystical stuff. Very interesting fellow. So isn't it unusual and amazing that the richness of life, where you can have these superpowers, delving into the esoteric world and these extrasensory capacities, and within those programs, you'll find the most remarkable people who are not what you might expect them to be.
Indeed.
It's a rich world.
Someone's written in a couple of things here. Hi guys, I was recently at a pub raffle when I had a sudden overwhelming certainty that I would win if I purchased a ticket. I did, and I won.
There you go.
Well done.
Exactly.
Next time you get one of those, let me know. And another one, someone's written in, sensing the dysfunctionality of feel-good, heartfelt decision-making of the predominantly 5-6 community, seeing the delusion and short-term efficacy of the solutions, waiting for it all to end in tears. Great show, always timely.
Well, that's an interesting microcosm of the macrocosm right there.
Yes, it is.
And really, this is a large part of what we're talking about on this show, is making sense of the future and understanding the behavioural patterns that are playing out at the moment and the long-term implications of those.
Very good.
So
Thank you for that. Yeah, really, really great.
Contribution. So right now, the US intelligence community has just announced what's essentially a competition, really. The Intelligence Agency for Research, which is the acronym for this is IARPA. People might be familiar with DARPA, which I think looks at materials research, and there's an intelligence version of that called IARPA.
Yes.
The research arm for the US Director of National Intelligence is offering $250,000 in prize money in a contest to forecast geopolitical events such as elections, disease outbreaks, and economic indicators.
Yes, fascinating. This comes from a team of researchers originally based at the University of Pennsylvania a few years ago, 4 years ago, wowed the US intelligence community by producing a superior new way to forecast geopolitical events. They were called the super forecasters. And so that's what we're talking about here. So what's this about? This is, I think you should enter, Steve.
Yeah, look, I'm not really, I don't know if I've got the wherewithal to be a super forecaster, really. I think one of the most difficult things is forecasting the future, in my experience. It's interesting, and I guess, having studied Taoism for many, many years, I tend to sort of take a Taoist approach, that there is an underlying pattern of change, which is often called the Tao, which translates as the way or the path, and we can tune into it.
The pathless path, really.
And so, we can sense that flow of change somehow, and then with the right cultivation of our personality and our being, we can synchronize with that and be in the right place at the right time. And what I've found over the years of Taoist practice is that when I'm in tune with that underlying pattern of change, sometimes it looks like I can predict the future, because I'll get led to somewhere where something's about to happen. I'll be in the right place at the right time to go, oh yeah, or step up and provide the answer to something without any premeditation whatsoever, but just by simply being in sync with what's emerging. I end up being in the right place at the right time. And
so that's a big key right there, in terms of where we're hopefully, we think, evolving to, is that capacity to enhance that ability that you're talking about, that you receive sometimes.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And it's like any personal development. If you give it time and pay attention to it, then these things can be cultivated and they can be grown as capacities. So it seems, and of course some people have a natural ability, they seem to be born into this life with just a natural capacity to do certain things. And in my time, I've also come across people who are quite amazing in terms of their ability to do things like read tarot cards and, tell you who you are and what your future is. And yet you look at other aspects of their life and they're in disarray, So this is an example of that lines of development thing, where somebody's got like an extreme capacity in one particular area, but they can't manage their money or, keep their house clean or whatever it might be.
Can you relate, folks?
Hey.
I can. A couple of other texts quickly, if I'm jumping, sorry, I interrupted there. Hey, Conrad, one of our listeners in Melbourne. Hey, Conrad. He had a sense of telepathic connection trying to kick in with Steve late Saturday night.
That sounds outrageous.
Someone else has written in.
That's true. Yeah, yes. Thanks, Conrad.
Yeah, thanks, Conrad. And someone else has written in, have you guys heard of cognitive bias? Well, of course, and that is a good a good thing to sort of bring attention to in some ways too.
Yeah, there are many, many different biases. I saw a really good diagram once of all the different biases in science. It was quite comprehensive.
Oh my God.
I probably got it saved away somewhere, but there were too many to remember.
I love it.
Too many to remember. I think it was a bias.
Yeah, bias towards bias.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, Conrad, great to have you listening, mate, and contributing. And Conrad and I keep in touch from time to time, and we're sharing personal experiences around unusual sensations in the body, which are a little bit hard to describe, but it kind of feels like some kind of electromagnetic energy that flickers through the body, and I sometimes liken it to a fluoro tube where the starter in the fluoro tube is failing, and so it just flicks on and off, like it shoots a bit of electricity through the tube, and then it dies out again. And I've been feeling it, sporadically for some years, and initially when I started to feel it, I thought it was something to do with me, getting ill or something like that. But after a while, I realised, no, I actually wasn't getting ill. It was just some strange thing. And we're still not really sure what it is. And so Conrad's keeping an eye on fluctuation of the Schumann resonance, which is the background frequency of the planet. And another possibility is inbound cosmic radiation from beyond the planet. And it could be something else that we haven't thought of yet. So, and I encourage others to do this, is to start voicing these things, because there's probably a lot of people out there who are having unusual extrasensory experiences that they can't really explain. And it's a really good time to be sharing that with trusted friends, and also to communicate and share. And, for example, recently, both Conrad and I, Conrad's in Melbourne and I'm in the Byron Shire. Are
you sure?
I think so, mostly. Some of them
you weren't too sure about that just then.
Scattered around. We had a night just recently where both of us felt some energetic disturbance, and we looked at the Schumann resonance, and actually the Schumann resonance was off the scale. There was a big spike where it went way beyond its average frequency on that evening. So these are the things that we're pushing into as humans. This new way of being human is emerging within us, and it's kind of like, I guess, changes in the body, equating that to like getting a new car, which is a fantastic, extra new car, which has got new technology, and you don't quite know how to use it. And so you get in there and try and figure out how things work without having a manual to look up. And really, as we emerge into this new paradigm and subsequent paradigms, we need to work together to put together user manuals to, help explain what are these things that we're feeling, and what are these new capacities that are emerging, and can we rely on them, and how can we develop them further and make them more reliable, and how are they useful in everyday life. And
of course, in tradition, in our tradition, in sort of Western Celtic tradition, they're called the clairs, Clairs, interested in clairs, and the clairs being clairvoyance and clairaudience and clairsentience. I mean, what you're talking about feeling,
yes.
Clear seeing, clear feeling in some way.
Yeah.
For example, my particular thing I have for years and years, and started way back in a certain instance. I won't go to the details of it now. Is to see blue lights flashing at times, and it happens now all the time. Just a kind of recognition or a resonance somewhere in my conscious, which is a bigger picture thing, and I'll see a flash in blue light somewhere in my, and it's an external thing. But I know now that some sort of affirmation that what I've touched on is accurate and true and real for me in that moment.
Does this happen like immediately before a roadside breath test?
I haven't even had a roadside breath test for a long, because they don't see me most of the time.
Very interesting. Blue lights. And of course, a lot of people report when they're meditating with eyes closed, seeing a blue or purple flame is quite a common thing. Is it? Would you equate it to that kind of thing, or?
I wouldn't. No. I mean, it's more like the initial time it happened was in about the late 80s when I moved up here. My first original child was in a bit of trouble down in Adelaide. Her mother rang me and said, you should come down here, and I did. I went straight down there, and we had this amazing connection, her mum and I, in the night, and I connected with her, and she'd been through a very difficult time as a teenager at that time. wonderful person now, headmistress of a school, etc. But at that time, quite a strong moment. But something in the energy of me going down there and kind of helping to just offer me myself in that situation at that time.
Yeah.
And I went to bed in their house that night, in my room, because I stayed with them, with her and her other partner, who's a good friend, and they have other kids and stuff. Stayed in the room there, and I opened this book that I had, which was actually a channeled book from the ascended master known as Hilarion, one of the ascended masters, which I'd been reading at the time. I opened the book after this incredibly heart-opening experience with the mother of my daughter, and all these blue lights came zooming out of the thing. It was incredible. It was such a powerful certainty in me that this was an affirmation that my coming down there, how I dealt with it myself, was in line, I suppose. This is an
open-eyed sensation.
It's an open-eyed sensation.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
And so I've had that same thing now, but not this flourish of them in the same way. But occasionally, it's they just sort of appear. But it's clear when they appear that I'm on some clear path, some moment where I get something, I see something.
Yeah. I went through an interesting time when I was flying the rescue helicopter up in Mackay for 5 years, and that is a very random kind of work. You never know when you go to work whether you're going to be doing anything at all, or whether you might have a busy day and what it is you might be responding to, various accidents and incidents. And so at the time I also was married to a clairvoyant, and so I was very accustomed with the sort of esoteric and the idea of being able to sense things that most people might write off as being unsensible or nonsensible. And so I went through a process of, as really a way of developing my intuition, of trying to tap in on the way to work as I was riding to work on my motorbike through the beautiful warm tropical air up there at the time, whether I would be called to do a rescue that day. And I would see this in my mind's eye as like a window of opportunity, and I would look to see whether the window of opportunity was open or closed. And I actually got pretty damn good at it over time. And the roster that we were on involved going to the airport and living at the airport for 24 hours. So we had a base with a kitchen and a bedroom and everything, and I would just go and basically live at the airport for 24 hours, eat, sleep, just do what you normally do, and then if a job came up, I would jump in the machine, with the paramedics, and would go and do a job. And I also started to hone it down to sense whether I was going to get a job in the middle of the night or not, because sometimes we'd get called at like 2 a.m. and have to go flying into a very black sky. And you need to be quite alert, and of course the pressure was on to get airborne as quickly as possible. So I might get a phone call and then need to be, I could be in the air within 20 minutes. So I'd have to wake up, understand what it was that I was going to, what I was going to find at the other end, do all my flight planning, and look at the terrain and how was I going to land if there were no lights in the area. And I did have one of those massive big night suns, which is very, very useful. But I'd also have to plan, okay, how am I going to safely descend in this area? Am I going to have enough visual cues and those sorts of things? I'd have to work all that out, then, meet the crew, get in the machine and blast off and be in the air. And once you get in the air, in the helicopters that I was flying, there was no autopilot, so you basically had to keep your hands on the controls all the time, so you couldn't really do much in the way of planning in the air. And so what I started to do was to use this, develop this capacity of sensing, is there something happening or not, and feel into, is it going to be an evening job? And if it was, I would have a sleep in the afternoon to make sure that I was well rested before I went flying in the evening. And again, I got pretty good at it over time, actually.
And you can, of course, this is just like a muscle. You can actually increase the viability, the strength of this particular muscle. Before we take a quick break, a couple other comments in. I want to come back to the cognitive bias, just to acknowledge that we weren't dissing that. Of course, there is cognitive bias. My interpretation of that today, right now, is this little phrase I've always used for years and years, and that is, everybody's got beliefs, right? So have your beliefs, but don't believe in them. Yeah. Because once you believe in them too strongly, they become fundamental, ideological, and they become stuck in that sort of bias. It's useful to stay as open as possible to input. Someone else has said, strong intuition tells me the blind introduction of 5G is going to make nuclear radiation and fluoride seem like health supplements. Yes, well, 5G we won't talk about today. I'm going to be doing some stuff on this on my other show, North Coast Positive, on Friday. It is obviously a very big issue for a lot of people out there in the world. There's a current it's in the zeitgeist and it's resonating around, so we'll come back to that. Someone else has written the Schumann resonance data for our information. You can open it in Google Chrome. There's it's a Russian website here. It's given the website. We can't actually open it on this computer, so I can't see that right now.
Yeah, no,
but you probably know that one.
I do know that one. It's a Russian website, and we can tweet
sosrff.tsu.ru/sosrff.tsu.ru.
It seems that Russian website seems to be the only source of live human resonance data that's available on the internet at the moment.
Okay. You're resonating right now on Future Sense with Steve McDonald and Nick Jeans. 11:47 on Future Sense, coming up to 10:47. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Coming up to 11 o'clock and pregnancy, birth, and beyond. Thanks for your texts and your tune here to Steve McDonald and myself, Nick Jeans. Good morning, Nick and Steve, says the last texter. Lovely listening to you both this morning. A couple of days ago, I avoided a car accident because I trusted my intuition, instincts, and moved my car out of harm's way moments before I would have been hit by another car.
Beautiful.
There was also a sense of slow motion in that moment. That's really key, that sort of bending of time that occurs in these kind of crisis situations.
Often the case. Absolutely. That's wonderful.
Very cool. Yeah, so last few minutes we're talking in this period about ESP, telepathy, the growth of intuition and what that may mean in terms of evolutionary impulse going on the planet. People like Rupert Sheldrake have been wonderful in this area for many years. Most of you would be familiar with Mr. Sheldrake, English scientist, alternative scientist, but well respected at the same time, who originally came up with an idea called the morphic resonance. But he's also been involved in various other projects, including the Perrott-Warwick project for research on unexplained human and animal abilities. So there's lots of this work, and this is at Trinity College in Cambridge. It's not some sort of, dicky place down the road, so to speak. So yeah, there's so much research going on here, because what does it mean? I mean, how are we going to make use of this? What does it show us about where we're going?
He's a wonderful progressive scientist, Rupert Sheldrake. I think if we look at this from the big picture point of view, what we're seeing is that out of the modern scientific industrial era, which has been absolutely rationally driven and extremely materialistic, we're moving through layer 6, which is taking us back inside to being a feminine, communally oriented system of consciousness. It's about feminine aspects like looking inside and being open to receive, and so it's drawing us into the use of intuition, and at the same time we're being overwhelmed with rational information from Google and other technologies. So we are losing the capacity to sort through data like we used to during the scientific and industrial era. Once upon a time, if you were a scientist, you would collect all the data, look through it all, and figure out what you wanted to figure out. But now there's so much data, you just can't do that. And so we have to find other ways of guiding ourselves, and a different compass. And that compass is taking us towards trans-rational ways of operating in the second tier of consciousness. And so layer 6 is preparing us for that. Layer 6 is our platform we jump off, and layer 6 is opening us up to the possibility of using intuition and helping us learn what intuition is. It's guiding us to talk to each other, to share our experiences, what we're urging today. And to learn from each other that, okay, there are other senses that we can tap into here which are not about rational analysis.
But it's tricky too, isn't it? Because it's such a thing, we have talked about it before, and that's called the pre-trans fallacy, which is a concept I think brought in by Ken Wilber in his work on spiral dynamics based on Claire W. Graves' work.
That's right, and that is a consequence of this crossing over from the dominance of the rational mind into the trans-rational space. And so we have to slowly wean ourselves off relying on this rational materialist data and taking into account our emotions and our other extrasensory capacities, and using those for decision making. And in the process of crossing over, we have to learn to discern within ourselves the difference between signals that are driven by fear, for example, or superstition, and signals that are actually coming from a truer kind of intuition, or what I'd like to call a quantum consciousness, where we're actually tapping into the quantum field and we're pulling information directly out of that without any rational process. And it's a tricky space, and typically everybody gets confused as they're navigating through this change process, because they're they're trying to wean themselves off the rational-minded stuff. They're trying to tap into their emotions and their deeper intuition, and then they have to discern between, okay, is this actually something I'm thinking about because of my fears, or is it actually a genuine, intuitively driven signal that's arriving, and that's a learning process. It's like learning anything. You have to practice it. You have to try it out, see if it works, and then eventually you'll get to the point where you can discern between, okay, no, that's actually just fear coming up. It's not a full intuition. And of course, this translates massively to the climate discussion at the moment, massively, because so much is fear-driven in that space right now.
And just to take a slight sideways here, there's a piece in the conversation in the last couple of days, 5 aspects of Pentecostalism that shed light on Scott Morrison's policies and politics, and I think it's a space we're going to be seeing more of. But that notion that God is speaking to me, that I speak in tongues, that the first thing that Morrison said when he accepted that he'd won the election was, I believe in miracles, and it mentions this in here, and these notions that these capacities through Pentecostal Christianity actually are sort of intuitive, connected capacities to the greater being, so to speak, to God, if you will. Yeah. And that's a muddy space too, because perhaps there is a real connection there because of that strong belief, faith, or perhaps it's an illusion, but hard to tell.
Yeah, at some level, despite the fact that we're developing finer and deeper capacities with the emergence of layer 6 and beyond, at some level right through humanity's history, we've had the capacity, of course, to tap into other dimensions, in various ways. And of course, there are many reliable records of that happening in very, very old societies. And just to complicate that space, we have the fact that our history is incomplete, and there's emerging evidence increasingly of what we might call superior civilizations in some ways that existed before our recorded history. So it's not a clear linear trajectory. Surprise, surprise. But what I was going to say was that depending on which layer of consciousness is our dominant paradigm, our worldview, we put on those glasses and we see everything through that. So if we're going through, for example, layer 4, which is where all of these traditional religions emerged, we put on our glasses and then we get a message from, through interdimensional channels, then of course it's going to be from God. And then, if we're in the layer 5 space, then it'll be from an evangelical or Pentecostal God.
Or some sort of TV guru or something like that.
So it's a matter of understanding that human consciousness takes us through these layers, and each layer is like a window or a set of glasses that we put on to interpret the world, and it gets flavoured by the themes.
Really important to see it that way. The original configuration, which comes from the times of Claire W. Graves' work, was these stages of growth, this sort of hierarchical stage, where we're not talking about that here. We're talking about we see through, as Steve says, we see through these windows of value systems onto anything. You can project onto anything. It's an incredibly valuable way of seeing it. Nearly out of time. You did want to mention this Israeli piece, this Israeli study, a neuroscientist who has a strong belief in precognition. Anything we can say about that in 30 seconds or so?
Cognitive neuroscientist, author, futurist, and grandmother Julia Mossbridge had a dream, and in the dream, her grandmother said to her something about reading a book from right to left instead of left or right, and her grandmother was Jewish, of course, and eventually she figured out it was a reference to reading Hebrew, and then that had a significant impact on a particular occurrence in her life, because it just, there was one of those moments where that little snippet of information which had come through a dream came together, and she managed to decipher something in a way that she wouldn't have otherwise, and it was very synchronistic.
Yes.
And so that led her to take an interest in looking at these esoteric topics as a scientist, though. And now she's a fellow at the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which of course is the organisation that was started by Edgar Mitchell, the American astronaut who did the psychic experiments on his way back from the moon.
He definitely had an experience out there, an overview effect, that's for sure.
Yeah, so this lady, just very briefly, Dr. Julia Mossbridge, has written a book called The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition. So if you're interested in looking at that from a scientific angle, that might be a good book to explore.
And we will post all of these links to our Twitter feed, which is at Future Sense Show. And as I said earlier, futuresense.it, the website, which you can, as a portal to the podcast. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us today. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Nick.
Great pleasure. We'll be back next week, Monday morning, 9 to 11. You've been listening to Future Sense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Future Sense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.